Let's head out to a great matchup, the first round of FCS playoffs. And Brad and I were really looking forward to calling every round of the FCS playoffs. Unfortunately, being rivalry week, we've got to call the rivalries in the FBS. But make no mistake, this game is just as important to us as well. We love the FCS. We love the FCS fans. This matchup is going to be a great one to kick off the FCS playoffs. The Tennessee State Tigers, 9-3, hit the road to take on the 8-4 Montana Grizzlies. Late kickoff on Saturday night, 10:15 p.m. kickoff on the East Coast on ESPN2 at Washington Grizzly Stadium in one of my favorite towns in all the U.S., Missoula, Montana. Brad, we've talked about Montana Grizzlies time and time again over the last year or so. Now we get a chance to talk about the Tennessee State Tigers. This is a great matchup for all of the FCS fans out there. Brad, I'll turn it over to you. Thoughts on this game and who comes out on top to take on the next opponent in the second round of the FCS playoffs?
Just real quick, Nate, thank you for the intro. We love our FCS fans here on Break the Huddle. Thank y'all so much for your views and everything. And as Nate said, we're going to continue to talk about the FCS playoffs. They're such fun games. Nate, this is such a fun game to me. Just so many storylines. Looking at Montana's schedule, man, they've got 4 losses, but they have played some great competition. They played North Dakota. We picked the UC Davis game a couple weeks ago. Did we pick the Montana State game? I can't remember, but Montana, look, 8-4, but this is a team that they've played some serious competition. I'm very, very impressed with the Grizzlies. They're one of the historic, just powerhouses in FCS football, and they do a great job up there in Missoula. Jumping over to Tennessee State, Nate, this is a fun one. They've got a good team, but Nate, this is a fun one because they've got a legend head coach in Eddie George. Eddie George, the legend Ohio State running back, and played for the Houston Oilers, the Tennessee Titans. He is just a phenomenal guy. Dion gets a lot of media for obvious reasons, but to me, Eddie George should too. He has done such a great job there for this Tennessee State program. He's got them in the playoffs, and he's got a good football team, man. I'm gonna tell you though, this one to me, it comes down to Tennessee State's traveling across the country. It's gonna be I'm seeing it's gonna be probably about 26 degrees up there at kickoff. Imagine the wind's gonna be swirling. Encourage you, if you're an FBS fan and you don't really follow FCS football, watch this one. It's going to be a great environment, and that is a cool stadium. I mean, it's a pretty setting. It's going to be freezing. That stadium's going to be rocking. I really like Eddie George and the job he's done there at Tennessee State, but I'm going to take the Grizzlies in this one just because they're at home, just because this is a veteran team. They played a tough schedule, and I think that's going to end up paying off for them.
Yeah, Brad, there's a lot of storylines coming into this game. You mentioned Eddie George and the great job that he's done with Tennessee State, and he doesn't get enough credit for this. There's no doubt about that. 9-3. I remember a few years ago, people were asking, who's going to have the better career in the FCS? Is it going to be Eddie George or is it going to be Deion Sanders? And Deion Sanders obviously did very well. He had the number 1 player in the nation in Travis Hunter at Jackson State. He had his son in Shedeur Sanders. He had Shiloh Sanders, his other son. A lot of key guys that were playing with him at Jackson State. But then you look at this Tennessee State Tigers team. This is a team that was down and out. Program was not in the best shape. Eddie George comes in, cleans it up. Fast forward a few years later, and he's got this team in the first round of the FCS playoffs at 9-3. That's really impressive to me. To your point, though, it's going to be very challenging playing on the road. Granted, I looked at the forecast. I'm no meteorologist, but there's no snow in the forecast. That's huge. It's going to be cold. Don't know what the winds are going to be. It's going to Brad's point, be in the low 20s or low 30s to 20s. It's going to be freezing. There's no doubt about it. You're going to have to bundle up for this one. But when it comes down to it, with that being said, don't think it's going to play a part in the passing attack. But again, I look at the rushing game. Who has the best rushing attack? Because that's what's going to win these types of games. You look at Tennessee State, Eddie George, an impressive running back. I don't think he's paid much attention to his offense. I get it. You got to play to your strengths. You may not have the best running game in the FCS, but they're only averaging about 111 yards per game rushing. You got to be better than that, especially when you get into the playoff games where you're going to have to depend on your guy. Maybe your quarterback goes down. Maybe weather comes into effect. You're going to have outstanding obstacles that you can't control. But what you can control is what you can control. The rushing attack has not been controlled, and they have not done very well. Only 15 touchdowns to that 111 yards per game, only 1,300 yards rushing for the year. Then you look at the other side of the ball with Montana and their rushing attack, 200 yards per game, 2,400 yards on the season, and 33 touchdowns. Brad, this is a no-brainer. Then you look at their defense. I am impressed with Tennessee State. They've got 28 sacks on the year, a loss of 215 yards. They've had 73 penalties, which has been very, very unfortunate for them. That's 656 yards of penalty, Brad. That's 6 football fields of penalties throughout the year. That's not great. They're averaging about 54 yards per game of penalties. That's not going to win you many football games. You got to be disciplined, especially when you're playing on the road in such a hostile environment, and they're only converting 38% on third down. So you can look anywhere and everywhere on this Tennessee State field. They haven't been outplaying their competition, even though they got a 9-3 record. Got to give them credit. You look at the other side of the ball in Montana. They've been dominant in all facets, right? They're only giving up about 25 points per game. They're averaging about 361 yards per game allowed on defense total. And they're only giving up about 153 yards per game rushing. So they've done very well. They've gotten about 22 sacks for 154 yards. And then you look at the penalty differences, not much better. They've gotten 79 penalties on the year for 766 yards, I think it said about 63.8 yards per game of penalties, which is not great either. But again, you go back to the rushing attack. I cannot emphasize that enough. When you talk about the rushing attack, that's what opens up the pass game. Montana's going to come out running the ball. They're going to open up the pass game. I think they edge out in this one. There's no spread, but I think Montana takes this one in a close one. But to your point, Brad, if you're a football fan in general, you've got to watch this game. The FCS playoffs are very well organized, and it might give you a little taste and preview of what it's going to look like in this year's 12-team playoff for the college football playoff. Hopefully it can be as well orchestrated as the FCS, but we're going to find out. But for this game, giving the Montana Grizzlies in a close one to win the first round of the FCS playoffs. Let us know down in the comments who you think is going to take away this win in Missoula, Montana, between the Tennessee State Tigers and the Montana Grizzlies.